Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. This is going to be part of the Law and Crime Author Series, and I have a brilliant guest for you today. Oh, by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. And folks, we have a show that is After the Fall. This is an Audible original that you can listen to. And it deals with the FBI's investigation into 9/11. And we, as NYPD officers that were on the job back in 2001, 22 years ago, which is so hard to believe. When you mention it to people today that maybe even in their early 20s or mid-20s, they almost don't believe that 9/11 occurred. And that's why it's so important to keep these things alive. And that's why I brought on retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon. He's much more than just a retired FBI agent. He got a law degree along the way. He's a Long Island boy. Two brothers were his dad and his brother were NYPD sergeants, and he's now a writer for television. We'll get into that when I introduce Bobby. But first, folks, hold on to your seats. You're in Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories, a Law and Crime Author Series. We'll be back right after this. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped in 10th and Ranch Michael by there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Folks, in the lead up to the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, we asked a couple of dozen current and former FBI agents who were at the attack sites and around the world that day to tell us about the investigation they led, the terrorists they captured and interrogated, and the crime scenes they spent months digging through. The result is an original, sweeping and active saga of the FBI's 9/11 investigation, the biggest case in FBI history. Many of the stories had never been told, much less heard together. The news of the Taliban's sudden return to power in Afghanistan adds an unexpected importance to this story. The war in Afghanistan was a consequence of the 9/11. 20 years ago, the FBI embedded with the military and helped them identify targets to dismantle al-Qaeda and capture suspects. Back then, the Taliban gave Osama bin Laden safe harbor. We hope that history will not repeat itself. We also hope that listeners will find this series not just riveting, but also valuable as the history of 9/11 and its aftermath continues to be written and understood. Peter McDonnell and Bobby Chacon, creators and writers of After the Fall. Bobby Chacon is the former FBI agent who worked out of the New York and Los Angeles field offices. Chacon grew up in Long Island, earned a law degree from Hofstra University, and at the FBI worked kidnappings, bank robberies, and violent international drug syndicates, including investigating the Lucchese crime family and providing counterterrorism security at the 2002 and 2004 Olympics. He also led the FBI's underwater forensic program to collect evidence at the crash scenes of TWA 800 and the Space Shuttle Columbia. In 2005, Chacon was assigned to Baghdad, Iraq, to help form the Baghdad Police Academy, where he taught criminal and counterterrorism investigations. For the next 8 years, he was full-time team leader of the FBI's Los Angeles dive team, traveling the globe performing search and recovery operations and training. After a 27-year career, Chacon retired from the FBI in 2014. In 2015, Chacon became the technical advisor on Criminal Minds Beyond Borders, then for season 14 of Criminal Minds, where he also became a writer's consultant. Chacon then co-wrote an episode of season 15 of Criminal Minds. He has since worked on the series for HBO Max and ABC. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest, retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon. Welcome to the show, Bobby.
Hey, it's great to be back, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Bobby, that was a long, man. You wrote that. That was very well written, but it was a mouthful there.
I never know what to highlight when I'm on these things, because I've had a very interesting and been fortunate to have a very varied career so far.
When you look back, and before we get to this story, when you look back on your FBI career and even growing up on Long Island, I believe you got a law degree before you joined the FBI, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, I mean, it seems like a long journey, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But, I was, so the FBI, I graduated high school when I was 16, first of all. And then, so I started college early, and then I finished law school early. So when I went to the FBI, I was 23, I just turned 24. And the minimum age to enter the FBI is 23. The average age of my academy class was like 29 and a half, almost 30. So, I got most of my schooling done out of the way really early in my life. And then I started my career really young. Young by FBI standards, and and then 27 years flew by, we cover the same time period. Crime in the late 80s in New York City, in the early 90s with the crack epidemic, and I mean, it was for somebody that like us who likes the action and likes to be out in the street making collars. It was the place to be at the time to be it, and I was working Jamaican drug gangs in Brooklyn in like 90, 91, 92, somewhere, when we had that 2,200 homicides in one year that broke, I think, may still be the record. And I was working in the 6-7 and the 7-7 squad, Brooklyn South homicide. So, and when I look back on those days, those are some of the fondest memories, not because of the work we did, but because of the people, Jack Winane, Mike Paul, these detectives I work with, I still am in touch with via social media. We're all retired now, but it's great to keep in touch. And, just last week, I was back in 1PP for the first time in 22 years. I haven't been back to Lower Manhattan in 22 years. I went last week to a bunch of us that worked Ground Zero, got awards from the FBI Director Ray. And we had so many of us that we didn't have enough room in the FBI office. So they borrowed the big auditorium in 1PP. And, I hadn't been back to Lower Manhattan in 22 years. I certainly probably hadn't been in that auditorium. The last time I remember, maybe the only time, I was there in 1975 when my dad got promoted to sergeant. And
Wow.
God gave him his sergeant shield. There's a picture of me as a, 12 or 13-year-old kid next to my dad, outside of 1PP. I treasure that photo. And last week I had a chance to be back there for the first time in decades. And it was a pretty emotional trip, because I got to see the 9/11 Memorial and Museum for the first time, and it was an emotional 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, no, I've been to the memorial a couple of times. I was teaching college, and I brought my class there a few times, and a couple of the kids there had lost family members, and it became a very emotional day for sure. It's a beautiful memorial, and we hope that something like that never happens again. But again, this is it's October 9th now, and we just saw what happened in Israel, and terror is all over, and it's really scary. Anyway, I don't want to segue to that. I want to stay on this story. Let's talk about the idea and after the fall.
Sure. Well, the idea is very similar to what we just mentioned about you taking your classes to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, right? Because it's a history lesson, not just a museum. It's an important history lesson. And actually, Director Ray and the FBI has now instituted a policy where every FBI agent, new agent class candidates down at Quantico have to come up. They actually fly them up, and they go, maybe they bust them up. They come up. Every class has to come up and go through the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Every new agent trainee from Quantico does that as part of their training. So just as that is an important history lesson that we shouldn't forget, when I approached this project, it had been in my mind for a couple of years. And as we were approaching the 20th anniversary, I tried to put it into effect, and I did that. And what it was basically was, I didn't want to tell a story like the Looming Tower, which was fictionalized and things. I wanted to have my colleagues, who I knew worked so diligently and so hard and paid tremendous prices physically and mentally in doing that work in the investigation of 9/11, of the 9/11 attacks. I wanted the public to hear from them directly. I knew them. I heard from them directly. So I wanted their stories to be told. Some of them had never been told before. because they couldn't, and they're now retired, and you have a little more freedom to speak when you're retired. At least one or two of them testified before the 9/11 Commission, but they testified behind a screen with their voices altered and their identities hidden. And so now they were free to tell those stories publicly as themselves for the first time and stuff. And so I think it's very interesting. I think people will have a new understanding of what was happening. You know, we often hear like the criticism of the FBI, and the FBI got surprised, they got caught with their pants out. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, in the series, you'll hear from Kenny Maxwell. He was a supervisor on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And let me tell people, like, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which was started in the late 70s, was a arm-in-arm squad of FBI agents and NYPD detectives that worked side by side together all the time. We went overseas. The detectives went overseas with us. I mean, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, they knew al-Qaeda. The Joint Terrorism Task Force in New York was probably the biggest repository of knowledge and intelligence on al-Qaeda, you know, on 9/11. And my friend Kenny Maxwell, who you'll hear in the story in After the Fall, he was at 1PP 2 weeks before briefing the commissioner and some of the chiefs, you know, and they all knew him. He's a New Yorker. He's been around forever. And, you know, he told them, he said, something's coming. We know something's coming. We just don't know where or how. But the assumption was there was going to be another Cole attack. There was going to be another attack overseas on U.S. interests. Maybe, you know, the FBI was actually still investigating the East Africa embassy bombings, if you remember, just a few years before that. And then the USS Cole. We were on the ground, not only us, but our NYPD detective partners on the JTTF were on the ground in Yemen, were on the ground, you know, in East Africa. And we were conducting those investigations because we knew al-Qaeda was behind those attacks. All of that information was being fed back to New York. We knew al-Qaeda was planning something. We just didn't know where and when. We were a little behind on that. Now, some of the mistakes made by the FBI where we had people at headquarters in Washington were a little risk averse. So you had an agent in Minneapolis and you had an agent in Phoenix. Both had little pieces and said, you know, somebody's taking flight lessons, but they're not interested in landing. I want to be more aggressive at going after them. And then Washington shuts them down because Washington is only interested in risk aversion, right? They don't want to take a chance of being, you know, Islamophobic or anything like that. So they go, no, don't be too aggressive. Do what you can without taking these aggressive steps. And so, you know, yes, there were mistakes like that made in not being aggressive enough in those two instances that I know of. But
Bobby, can I just stop you for 1 second?
Sure.
Does our freedom and does our like, as you say, risk averseness, does that hurt us in our protection and our view of security and how we may be way too trusting and we don't go the next step when something like hearing like someone's taking flight lessons? And of course, now it sounds so ridiculous because we know what happened and they're only looking to fly up in the air. They don't want to learn how to take off or land right away. Now you hear that now you go, oh my God, that's a terrorist, you know?
Right.
But some of the things also pre 9/11, aviation security was a disaster, an absolute disaster. You could probably walk into an airport with a gun and go wherever you wanted to go back then. It was just absolutely ridiculous.
I think it's always a balance between civil liberties and security. Sure, you want to be completely secure. You go to a model like China, where you know there are no rights, and the government doesn't. Sorry, my dog's here. Let me close the door just a minute.
Okay. Live podcasts. This is some of the beauty of live podcasts, but it's okay. Bobby Chacon.
So I think it's always so our freedoms do put us at risk a little bit, but we have to balance that as a society. We don't want to be in a police state where you may be safer physically, right? But you don't have the freedoms that we enjoy. So there's always that balancing act that has to be struck. And I think, you know, as I get older and you know, retired longer, I think I like my freedoms, you know, and I detest government intervention and government action into my life. And so I think that's always going to be some kind of balancing act where you strike the balance between security and freedoms and stuff. And so, yes, I think, unfortunately, the more freedoms you have, the more safety you sacrifice in some respects. But that's, I mean, that's okay. I think that's okay. I think we as a society, I don't make the decisions, but as a society collectively, we make those decisions to say, where we draw that line. But like you said, like,
and Bobby, are we forgetting? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Are we forgetting the lessons of 9/11 through a lot of the things that we're doing? Open borders. I don't want to get political, but some of the things you would never have even considered that just a few years after 9/11.
I think what happens is I think things tend to flux. They like right after an incident, everybody's more accepting of a clampdown on freedoms and for our security stuff. And then, of course, over time, when nothing happens or very little happens, you get, I don't know if it's apathy, but you get a little bit more relaxed and say, okay, we can go back to the old way where, nothing's happened in a while. And, we're sitting here October 9th, on the eve of, not on the eve, but on the aftermath of just what happened in Israel. And, how seemingly possibly unprepared Israel seemed, right? It seems like they were caught by surprise. And we all know Israel as being very vigilant in their own security. But maybe because they haven't had an incident in a while, maybe apathy set in or whatever. But yeah, I don't know that we've forgotten the lessons of 9/11, but I think, the further you get away from any incident like that, the less impact it has emotionally on people. And, I'm thinking like now we have a generation of people that are in college, that are maybe going into the PD, into the FBI, who were born after 9/11. So the emotional impact on them is much, much less. They hear about it like we heard about Pearl Harbor. But, if you were living during those incidents, it has much greater impact. So I think that it's not like you forget the lessons. It's just like you're dealing with a generation of people that the lessons don't hit as hard. They just don't. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to not only write, but have people hear from the agents that were there on the ground. Because when you hear the voices cracking, saying, I looked up and I saw the second plane hit, and I was standing at the base of the North Tower, those were people that were there. This is not an actor. This is not somebody reading a book. This was the people that were there when it happened. And then you'll hear from the people that were working at the New York City morgue, the FBI agents who were assigned to the morgue. The FBI agent that walked the first day into Shanksville and said, looked and he got there a day late, and he came up from Quantico, and he said, well, where's the plane? And they pointed to a hole in the ground, and it says, and there was nothing. There wasn't a piece of a plane that you could see, because it had dove into the ground so fast and so deep that you didn't even see it. So, and he was a guy that was at Waco. He was a guy that was at Oklahoma City. He had done some big crime scenes. But to hear him describe that field in Pennsylvania in his own voice, this is a grizzled veteran guy. It's been a lot of bad things. And to hear him go through that emotional impact journey of him, he was in charge of excavating the Pennsylvania site, and it's important to hear that stuff. And you hear him. One of the stories I hear him tell is every day he would pass by this elementary school on his way to the site from where the motel where they were staying, and there was this elementary school, and they had put the students that had written things on it, and saying thank you to the first responders and everybody that was working out there. And he just saw more and more put up on the fence, and that fence by the end, he was there, a month, and by the time that fence was completely covered, he was leaving to go out of town. And you'll hear this story if you listen to one of the episodes, and I get emotional just recounting it. And he said, I had to stop into this elementary school and thank the principal, because every day when I went up by there, I slowed down and I looked at the things the students had put up on the fence the next day. And so he stopped into the principal's office, and he said he wanted to thank the principal. He said, I want to thank you, and can you pass along our thanks to the students and let them know that those of us that were working out there and passing by to our hotel every night, we saw that what they did. We saw those drawings. We saw the thanks they were giving us, and it meant something to us. And the principal says, hold on a second. And he gets on the intercom and he says, I have Special Agent, McCall here, and he's been in charge of, helping excavate the site and do all this stuff. And as he was going to leave, all the doors, it was like this one little hallway school, and all the doors open and all the students flooded out into the hallway, and he couldn't get out without them wanting to shake his hand. And he had school that age children at home in Virginia, and he had 3, and he just waded through this sea of kids that just wanted to thank him. And here's a guy, like I said, he was at Waco doing the excavation there. He was at Oklahoma City doing that and stuff. He's been around, and he said he lost it. He said he held it together. As soon as he got out the front door of that school, when the air hit him and all the kids were behind him, he lost it, and his drive home to Virginia. And then like the next day, he's at his kid's Little League game that he had missed for the month that he was there in Pennsylvania. And, everybody kind of knew who he was, the other parents and the coaches, and both at the end of the game, both teams lined up and they sang the national anthem to him, and again, he lost it,
Wow.
So these are human beings, people will want to criticize, things, but these, I love those stories because everybody has them and they're emotional and they're impactful. And I'm sure to this day, Todd, he's a friend of mine. I'm sure he's still impacted by those memories, and so it hit us, it hit us as a nation. I remember crying in my house watching TV because I don't know when it was. I'm a Yankee fan. I'm a lifelong New York Yankee fan, and everybody hates the Yankees. We're we're Darth Vader, right? I grew up with everybody hating the Yankees because we were so good. And I remember like a week or two after when baseball started playing again, the Yankees were in Kansas City, and I remember George Brett with the Pine Tar incident and everything. And so everybody hates us. I know that. So, but I remember somebody wearing like a Kansas City Royals jersey, holding up a sign that said, "We're all New Yorkers now." This was a week or two after, and I lost it. I like somebody likes us, and then Americans all pulled together, and there was this collective unity. But
Bobby, there really was so many heroes to 9/11. There really was. I mean, the firemen that lost 343, I think it was, New York City firemen. I mean, that's just horrific. A whole agency. I mean, for generations they lost. Firemen. It's a very the families come on that job, fathers, grandfathers. So there were whole families probably like wiped out that would never carry on that tradition of becoming New York City firemen. And, the same thing with cops, a lot of cops and Port Authority. I mean, I think they took the biggest hit as far as law enforcement. And then when you see the long-term, the health effects that we all have, I don't think anyone escaped that. If you were down there a lot of hours, you have something wrong with you from responding to 9/11, whether it's asthma or some kind of breathing issue, nodules on your lung, whatever, or cancer, some of the worst cancers. And to me, some of the greatest heroes down there were iron workers. They were unbelievable. Yeah. They were incredible. They were cutting that steel so they could remove it in a certain procedure so that it didn't collapse and implode. So I go to the World Trade Center medical twice a year, and I see some of these people, they're different color now.
Yeah.
I saw iron workers that were like yellow. I was like, what happened? And the guy was dying. He was dying,
I'm enrolled in the World Trade Center health program. I get monitored. We lost 2 agents this year to 9/11 illnesses and stuff. So, and the Agents Association fought hard, and now they're recognized now, even if they're retired and die, which they are now, as line of duty injuries. So their families get all the benefits. They get added to a martyr wall as if they were killed by adversarial action in the line of duty. In Quantico, we have a wall that has all of our fallen agents, and so those names are added. And we added 2 more this year so far. And that ceremony that I was at in New York City last week, my first time back in 2 decades, I just couldn't emotionally make the trip back until now. And they invited all of us that are part of the medical screening program back. And I met a couple of my buddies that I haven't seen in years that I know have cancer that is attributed to their work at 9/11, either at the Pentagon or at Ground Zero. I lost a friend that worked in Shanksville from a rare form of cancer that he contracted, most likely from his work there. And so I think we're up to, the FBI lost, I always consider it 2. The FBI officially lost 1 person, that Lenny Hatton was the agent that was lost. But John O'Neill, who was our boss of counterterrorism for years and years and hunted bin Laden for decades, had just retired from the FBI 2 weeks earlier and taken over as head of security for the World Trade Center. And John was 2 weeks on the job. And Kenny Maxwell tells this story of John because they were great friends. John had offered him a job as his second in charge of security, and the paperwork his retirement paperwork and his paperwork for Port Authority to go to work as assistant head of security were in the trunk of his car that got crushed when the North Tower collapsed. And Kenny tells that story. You know, they would have spent, if they would have delayed that attack 2 weeks later, he probably would have died in the tower with John, because they would have been working together, because John had offered him a job the Friday before 9/11. They had dinner in Manhattan, and John offered him the job, and Kenny thought about it over the weekend, called him Sunday night and said, I'll take it. And then Tuesday, the attacks happened and John lost his life. So I consider John a second FBI agent that we lost that day. But since 9/11, we've lost, I think, over 20. I think it's 23 now. Agents have died from illnesses that are attributed to there's John. Great guy. Was probably the most knowledgeable al-Qaeda guy in the government. Of course, got drummed out of the government because of politics, unfortunately. But, you know, he landed on his feet at Port Authority and was head of security for World Trade Center. And he died when the South Tower collapsed. His office was in the South Tower. Yeah, so After the Fall is the story of all these guys that are men and women who just, you know, answered the call. And, you know, people they'll learn that the investigation into the 9/11 attacks didn't start on 9/11. It started years earlier. Ali Soufan, who was one of our leading Arab agents and knowledgeable, the most knowledgeable in al-Qaeda, was actually in Yemen on 9/11, conducting follow-up interviews on the USS Cole attacks, which was all tied together. The East African embassy bombings, the USS Cole, the attacks on 9/11 were all tied together. They're all the same people were involved and stuff, and we were on their trail. Particularly, there's two guys on that screen, Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hamzmi. You know, we're living in San Diego, and we didn't know it because the CIA did not tell us that. And you'll hear, if you listen to After the Fall, you'll hear from an agent named Steve Baumgarten, who later became an FBI profiler, but was on the JTTF at the time. And he asked the CIA on no less than 5 occasions about these two guys. He said, who are them? Do you know them? And on 5 occasions at least, they looked them in the eye and said, no, we don't have any information, when we know now that the CIA was tracking them and knew that they were living in Southern California. And for intelligence reasons, they feel they couldn't tell us, the JTTF, on the criminal side of the house, because there was that wall between intelligence and criminal. And Steve, if there's anybody, there's the USS Cole. I sent two of my divers there. We're on scene helping with the diving. But, you know, if there was anybody, you know, in my mind, who could have stopped at least one of the planes.
Did this guy go or no?
No, I was, that's me in my diving days. I was actually down in South Carolina. We were looking for a little 3-year-old who had drowned at the bottom of a lake. And when the Cole happened, I was deployed with my team down there, and I had a few divers that couldn't make it. They were in New York. I sent them over, and they were on scene at the Cole. But Steve Baumgartner was probably the guy I thought, in my opinion, now based on my research, could have stopped at least one of those planes if the CIA had told him that Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi were in San Diego. We would have had teams on them. We would have been surveilling them. We would have at least stopped that plane from doing its damage. And there were 2 of the 19 pictures you just showed. Steve, if you listen to After the Fall, his episode, he was a Navy pilot. He was a Navy fighter pilot before he came in the FBI. And he looked up and saw, a cowling of a plane. He knew it was al-Qaeda the minute he was there. The collapsed towers, he was running and covered in dust. He was one of those guys. And he got back to Kenny Maxwell's office, and they called. This is 2:00 in the afternoon on 9/11. And he hears from the FBI liaison to the CIA that says, yeah, we have 2 names that we knew. And he tells them the names, and Steve's like, you got to be kidding. I've been asking about those guys. You lied to me. And he goes, well, we did everything by the book. This is an FBI guy who was the CIA liaison. He was assigned over to CIA. And Steve just lost it. And he said, the book? I hope you're happy with that effing book, because we just lost maybe 10,000 people. This is like moments after, right? So we don't know. Yeah. He goes, there's probably 10,000 people down the street from me right now that are dead because you went by the book. And Steve lost it. And then his boss, Kenny Maxwell, put the pause button on the phone and said, Steve, this is not the time or place. Don't lose it here. This guy's in headquarters. We need to keep focused on what we're doing. And Steve had to cool down. And he, Kenny threatened him. He said, you'll be pulled off this case. I can't have this. We'll address this later when the proper time. But Steve was just steaming. He knew at that moment that these were two guys that came out of the USS Cole investigation. He knew they were al-Qaeda operatives. He knew they were up to something, and because they tracked them through a meeting in Kuala Lumpur, and 5 times he made requests in June of 2001, August of 2001, with the final 2 times, August, just weeks before, and they said no, we don't know anything about them. And
Bobby, I this is like not the only time you hear about politics getting in the way of sound law enforcement decisions. I mean, even as recently as us fleeing Afghanistan and leaving $1 billion worth of military equipment there, I understand that that the 13 Marines could have been saved if a sniper would have taken out the guy that they knew was on the scene that was a bomber, and he couldn't get the green light to shoot the guy. So it's like, is our
risk
country
aversion, right? Because some boss above that sniper, he was probably perfectly willing to take that shot, but some boss above him in the chain of command was risk averse. Didn't want to take he didn't want to be the one to say, who gave the order? I did. The higher they get in government, even in the military now, the Pentagon has gone completely woke. The higher they get, the less they want to take responsibility for anything. They want the guys on the street level to take the responsibility, right? They don't want to say, oh, I gave that order. Well, that's
Bobby, they used to say in the police department, when you made sergeant, you had to surrender one nut.
Well, when you made lieutenant, you gave the other one in?
Yeah, and then you gave up the other one. And big bosses, they were eunuchs,
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there's you understand, like guys like us who kind of did our whole career at the working grunt level, you understand where that mentality, where that comes from, because you did. I had, I mean, on much less scale, my criminal cases, I had bosses that I had to, and especially when we work in drugs, you have big show money, right? We had $500,000. We're going to flash. The bosses would go crazy. Oh my God, I'm a boss. We're going to take it. We're going to flash it. We're going to take it back. Don't worry about it. But the minute that 500,000 left the office, they weren't sleeping at night. They were home going, calling us every 5 minutes. Did you do it? Did you get the money back? Is it in the safe? Like, relax. We do this every day.
Bobby, I remember that during the Tompkins Square riots, they called it a police riot because I think the cops had it and they just basically kicked ass that day. The boss took off and he went on meal or something, make sure he put himself out. Where were you? Oh, I was on a personal. Like, it was like, you think that's gonna fly? Right. You better put your papers in tomorrow.
But that's it. There's so many, and I think it's getting worse. Even
look at Benghazi.
Yeah,
Benghazi,
I think the military was the final. You always thought the military wouldn't go that way, and they're solidly woke. They're solidly there.
Oh my God, I see that. I see that guy Milley. He should surrender all his medals.
Yeah, same. And I know guys that spent their whole careers in the military are embarrassed about that now, just as I am embarrassed by some of the things that the FBI shenanigans have been doing and stuff. And I think it's invaded and infected every agency, every department in the government. And I'm fearful for the next generation because they're being raised in this environment. They're raised to be woke, right? That's going to be ingrained in their.
Well, Bobby, even in television, that new show they put on East New York, it was so woke it went off the air. It was all bullshit.
Let me tell you something that I have a personal stake in that because I was writing with another writer, a very experienced writer, a new NYPD show, and CBS wanted a new NYPD show. They knew Blue Bloods was kind of long in the tooth, and they wanted something new. And we were in competition with East New York. And our show was much better. Everybody said our show is much better. Our show should have got greenlit. We should be made. If we did, it would still be on the air. It's a great show. East New York got the green light over us because on the golf course, the head of the network had a golf outing with the brother or the agent of the writer who was writing East New York. Now, these scripts are supposed to be secret, but you hear leaks and stuff. We knew their show wasn't very good, weren't well written. Our show is much more well written, should have been made, but because of politics, East New York got made. The network loves Jimmy Smits. They wanted Jimmy Smits back on the air. I understand that. But our show, our NYPD show, was so much better than theirs because you had me. I reached out for some of my NYPD contacts. It was rich. It was accurate. It was good. And they should have bought ours. They told us they were going to buy ours, but then a last-minute golf course deal happened on a Sunday afternoon. Monday, we got the call and said, "You're off." And I'm like, I'd be writing that.
That's disgraceful. That's disgraceful. Let me get back on track with this. Where were you when the planes hit?
Yeah, so everybody has, kind of their story. So at the time, and you showed the picture of me diving, I was head of the New York FBI dive team, and it was the only dive team in the FBI at the time. And there's just the thing. You see that tattoo. So that tattoo, if I can show it here, is that's 9/11. So if you see, those are the towers. There's the Pentagon. This is the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania. So this is my story of my day. At the top, I have the NYPD, FDNY, PAPD, FBI. I have all of those. I have Lenny Hatton's initials, John O'Neill's initials. So and I can tell a story about how this came about. But so on 9/11, about a month before, I flew out to Michigan because the Michigan State Police dive team needed our assistance because the FBI dive team, we had trained them in some equipment, and we had some equipment they didn't have, and it was a particular job. So I went out to Michigan. I did a site survey about what we were going to need. Came back. We were deploying the week of September 10th to Michigan to do this dive job. Usually takes a week or two, and 8 or 10 of us fly out there, my team. So I'm the team leader. So I'm going on the early morning flight out of Newark with 3 of my divers. The rest of the team's coming on a later flight, commercial flight, later in the day. We're all going to gather in Michigan, Traverse City, Michigan, and do the job. So I'm sitting in Newark on United Flight 91 from Newark to Chicago. We're going to connect from Chicago to Traverse City. We're taking off out of Newark on the morning of 9/11. Beautiful day. 4 armed FBI agents on the plane. I'm looking out the window, my window seat, that beautiful view of Manhattan, and the towers were always, the towers were built in the early 70s, and I used to watch them. My dad had a picture of them on his desk at home. And I'm looking at them, and I see the first plane hit the North Tower from my window seat on my United flight.
Wow.
We're just climbing out of Newark, northbound. And we bank left because we're on our way to Chicago. And about 10 minutes into the flight, I'm listening to, I think it was Channel 9 on the United Audio used to give you the pilots kind of, you could hear. And I could hear the pilots talking, and I could tell there was something wrong. At the time, when I saw the plane hit, I just saw like a flash and some spark, which I later learned was probably glass falling and glistening. I didn't know exactly what I had seen, but I turned to my seat and I looked behind me because I had a colleague sitting about 3 rows back, and he was on a window side. We were 4, everybody armed on the plane always has to know where everybody else is sitting, right? That's the airline rules and stuff. So I looked at him, and he just shrugged his shoulders because he had seen the same thing. We're like, we didn't know quite what it was, but there was an explosion and something looked like it hit. Now, we all remember the small plane that went into the Empire State Building years ago and stuff. As New Yorkers, you kind of, you know the lore, and so you say, oh my God, this has been a terrible accident. And then less than halfway into the flight, just a couple, maybe 15 minutes later, the female co-pilot comes out of the cockpit, and she motions for the 4 of us to meet her in the back alley. And again, Tuesday morning, empty planes. That's why they chose all the flights on Tuesday morning. And the last 10 rows, there was nobody in the last 10 rows. So we got in the back alley, and she said, the co-pilot said, look, 2 planes have been flown into the Twin Towers. There are 24 planes hijacked. At this time, remember, we're in the air. This is only minutes. So all the misinformation is happening. So there's a bunch of planes not responding. You can see, if you look at that on the graphic you're showing now, you can see like United Flight 93, right? That's the same flight path I was on United 91, because if you continue that plane and it doesn't turn around, it goes right over Chicago. United 93 was going to San Francisco. So they take the same flight path as United to Chicago would. And it's the same plane. It's a 757. So our pilots were in the pilot's lounge at Newark that morning with the United 93 pilots. So she tells us, it's Armageddon. She tells us there's planes hijacked all over the country. They're flying them into buildings and everything. So, we're way up here now, and we're 4 armed FBI agents. So put one of my guys outside the cockpit. I go into the cockpit to talk to the captain with the co-pilot. She takes her seat, and I could hear him trying to raise United 93 because we're supposed to be one behind them in the flight path. And that line right there, we're right behind them. We're the nearest one to them. So I think it's Cleveland Center was telling our captain to try to raise them point to point because they should be right in front of you. And I said, well, to the co-pilot, the pilot is talking on the radio. She's talking to me. And I said, where are they? She goes, we don't know. I said, well, how is that? Why don't you know? And she goes, they turned their transponder off. And I said, why would they do that? And the pilot must have been hearing us through one, out the other ear. And he kind of snapped back. He said, they wouldn't, like really, like emphatically. I'm like, well, okay. And then I looked back at her. I said, you told me they turned the transponder off. And he just barked at me that they wouldn't. I was, what does that mean? And she goes, and at that point, I could see her eyes welling up a little bit. And she goes, that means they're not flying that plane. Wow. And every pilot knew from the 70s when we had all of those hijackings, the pilots were told, don't give up control of the aircraft. Take them wherever they want to go. They want to go to Cuba. They want to go to Angola. Take them where they want to go. Get the plane on the ground, secure the passengers, and we'll negotiate the release. Don't worry. Don't give up control here. That was the standard procedure. So she knew that they would only give up that control of that aircraft under, by violence. They would have to be physically removed. And so she probably surmised that her friends, who she probably had coffee with an hour earlier, going over the traffic and the weather patterns that morning because they were flying in the same flight path, she knew that her friends were probably dead at that point. And and so I could see how upset she was getting. And so I said, where are we, when are we getting to Chicago? She goes, we're not going to Chicago. Chicago's been closed, all air traffic. We don't know where they're going to land us. They're going to put us down somewhere. And ultimately we landed in Detroit. And as we're coming in to the Detroit airport, I can hear the pilot go, just give me a gate. And the guy's got, there's no gates left. We have no gates. Just put it down. We'll send a team over to get your passengers out. And we literally were like the last plane in. And I remember coming in and a plane was like right next to us on the adjacent runway, which never happens. They don't put planes that close. And we were the last two that landed. And then he says, I got to get you on the ground and we're closed. And that I could hear air traffic telling that in Detroit. And I actually was looking out the window as we were landing, expecting to see Detroit on fire. Like I thought every major city in the country, because we're in this little bubble and we're getting very sparse information from the ground. And the only thing I do remember is somebody heard through something that the towers had fallen. And I laughed. I didn't laugh out loud. I laughed internally going, it's probably some non-New Yorker from the Midwest or something. They don't know. Like, I'm like, that's ridiculous. Those towers can't fall. They just can't. They're just too big. They're just like nothing can knock them down. Godzilla couldn't knock them down. You know, New Yorker, that was my thinking. I remember thinking that, like, oh, these rubes, these country folk don't understand those towers because those towers ain't gonna move. And it wasn't until they brought up stairs over. We got off on the tarmac. We collected our luggage right there. We waited right by the plane for the luggage to come off right at the plane. And then we made our way into this very chaotic Detroit airport. And it wasn't until we were wheeling our way, I was on the phone and I saw a big screen TV in a bar and everybody was huddled around it. And I saw the repeat. They were showing the repeat of the towers falling. And I just couldn't. I can't tell you what that moment was like. That was the realization that everybody else had known prior. I was probably the last one to actually realize that it really did happen, that those people.
Bobby, I was leaving the 2-3 detective squad on 102nd Street, and we were told to put our uniforms on and go down there. And just as I was leaving, I heard some sergeant was watching the TV, and I heard him scream, "Oh my God!" And that was when the first one came down.
Yeah.
And then we got on the FDR Drive and we drove south and there was no one on there. So we literally got down there really quickly. And one of the detectives said to me, he goes, "Sarge, we should park at South and Pike because if we try to pull right up," he goes, "we'll get stuck in there." I said, "Billy, that's a great idea." And that may have saved our lives. It really may have, that little decision that this detective implored to me. And I said, "That's a good idea." And we walked. And when we were crossing Houston Street, we saw the second building come down. Wow. I eyeball witnessed it. And it sounded like 100 trains coming into a station, just seeing it and dropping straight down. I think the way it was designed to fall, if something like that did occur.
Which was amazing. I think, we were lucky I personally, so when we landed in Detroit, we got through the airport, there were no rental cars left. Everybody was gone. They're like, forget, don't even ask. So I called the FBI office in Detroit and say, there are 4 New York agents. We need to get back. We've lost coworkers, family members, who knows? And so they go, well, you're in luck because the AG, I think Ashcroft was at the time, was supposed to be in Detroit that day. He was supposed to leave Washington. Well, he never left. So his advance detail had two 15-passenger vans, and his vans was hidden. The main team was still with him in Washington. So they had like 6 guys. So they were going to take one van back to DC, and they had another one available. So I go, okay, tell them to bring it by the airport. Here's where I am, and stuff. And so they come screaming up lights and sirens, escorts, and they deliver this van to us. And I remember throwing our luggage.
Hey, Bobby, you know something? That's great, because the NYPD would have said, sorry, there's no cars available.
Right. Yeah.
See how the feds have all that money?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's funny you say that, because so I drove this van, we drove, 4 of us took turns driving from Detroit back to Manhattan. And, we were talking, and it was a lot of silence, but like how many people you think died? And because we now know both towers collapsed, and we're listening to the radio, and I think of the 4 of us, 3 of it were native New Yorkers, and 1 had lived in New York for a long time. And I think the lowest estimate was 10,000 people. I mean, I think I said probably 22,000 people, based on the PATH train, based on the amount of people that worked in those towers and all that stuff. And so, it's tragic, but it could have been orders of magnitude more people could have died if it wasn't evacuated. Thank God, NYPD and FDNY are the best in the world at responding to mass. I mean, this isn't the first big event, the biggest, but it wasn't the first big event, right? We've had big events, and they're, just Times Square on New Year's Eve, like the city handled big things. And I think that, if you look at what happened, and you look at the heroes that responded, man, there was no hesitation. There was no, what do we do? There was boom, boom, boom. Do this, do that, do this. And all of that action, of course, many of those people lost their lives in the collapse, but all of that action saved so many lives. So many more people would have died. And like I said, the minimal estimate of the 4 of us was 10,000. I think the maximum was like 30,000. So I think people should realize many, many, many more people would have lost their lives that day if not for the quick action and cool, calm collectiveness of the New York City responders that just did their job, most of whom lost their lives, and just did what they do. They stayed calm. They responded to this enormous event with professionalism, and I think they saved tens of thousands of lives doing that.
I think, Bobby, I think you're right. One of the reasons, one of my favorite pictures from 9/11 shows 4 NYPD cops going towards the towers and other people running. And it said, while others ran away, we ran toward the towers. And that said everything.
Yeah.
That one flyer.
And the agent that we lost, Lenny Hatton, who lived in Jersey, he was a volunteer fireman in his town in Jersey. He went into fireman mode. And the FBI isn't trained to do this, right? So I think the reason he made several trips down into the mall, helping people up through the smoke, and he kept going back. And we found witnesses who identified him as the guy that helped them out. He made several trips down, and unfortunately, on one of them is when the collapse, he was down underneath. When I went to Lenny's funeral and we did the drive-by of his house, he had 5 kids, and I could hear them crying. And they all came out on the steps. And when we drove by, his turnout gear was at the end of his driveway. His boots, his coat, his big fireman coat, his big fireman helmet. And I tell you, it was there wasn't a dry eye in this procession as we all drove by his house and paid tribute to him. And it was in large part because he was a fireman, because he had that run towards danger, help people get away from danger. And Lenny lost his life, and he's one of those heroes, and that's why I have his initials on my arm. But it was amazing. And again, it was one of the reasons why I wanted to tell the story of the people who spent weeks and months doing the job at the morgue, at Ground Zero, at Fresh Kills Landfill. You'll hear from Richard Marks, who was the FBI agent whose best friend is the DI that was assigned to him, and him and the DI worked hand in hand at Fresh Kills, and they built
Jimmy Luongo was
Jimmy Luongo. And him and Richard Marks are like this to this day. They're like brothers because they have that shared experience. They built a city on top of a landfill. They built
Bobby, that I did all kinds of different duties, as did all NYPD guys during 9/11. my least favorite was going to Fresh Kills because
Sure.
I knew that was a toxic cancer site. From
Yep.
every time you went there, you were risking more of your life because the ground was bubbling with methane gas coming out of it.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, it was funny. It's typical NYPD shit. Oh, all right, guys, keep your cars down the hill. We'll take a bus up here. You're gonna get, you're gonna get de-washed and all that. That lasted one day, and it was all right. Bring your cars up here. Yeah, eat a sandwich on the pile. It was nuts.
Well, that was my experience at Ground Zero. The first day I was on the pile working, they had like a mask. Okay, wear this mask. And the next day they would come with a new mask. Oh, the mask we had yesterday aren't sufficient. Wear this one. The third day there was a third mask. I'm like, so you're telling me the masks I wore the first 2 days weren't sufficient? So whatever I breathed in the last 48 hours, I'm probably going to die of. And the mask kept getting bigger and heavier and hotter. And I remember looking over and guys had them hanging down here because September 20th, 21st, whatever. It's still hot. It was still hot in New York, and those things were impossible to breathe, and so some of us would pull them off and breathe for a few and then put them back on. And then we rotated through the morgue, through Ground Zero and Fresh Kills. And then I would go out to Fresh Kills and work with Richard's team. And you're right, you put on that big white Tyvek suit and you wade out into this toxic environment. But Richard tells such great stories. Him and Jimmy Luongo are such good friends because basically there was no game plan for something like this. They just had to create it. Like there was no book. There was no book to go by on building a small village that can process this amount of material coming in.
And they did a tremendous job. And the thing is, they came in like ridiculously under budget, I heard too, which was amazing.
Yeah. Well, people don't understand. Like initially, they were putting everything into trucks, and they would down the across Staten Island on trucks, and the stuff was so hot, the trucks were catching on fire because the stuff was still so hot.
That's all right. They were Gambino crime family trucks. That's all right.
Yeah, but they lost the contract because then they put it on the barges and they would float it across on barges thinking, all right, if it's on fire, at least it's in the water. So then they floated everything by barge because they couldn't, and it was that learning experience that Richard talks about in this series that we did. And you hear from him directly on how him and Jimmy Luongo came up with this plan on what to do and how to do it. And they were inventing they were building the train as it was running down the track. They were putting stuff on.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well now this happened. We didn't expect this. We have to respond. And he stayed until Richard fought because there was a time shortly after 9/11. I'm not sure how, month 2, 3. Where Mary Jo White, who was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York in Manhattan, said it's no longer, we're not really considering this a crime scene. We know about the 19 hijackers. We kind of know about, but this, we're not going to really find any evidence, right, in this wreckage and stuff. And so there was a thought that the FBI was going to pull out of, and Richard fought the powers that be in Washington. We are partners in this thing. We started it and we're going to stay till it's over. Whether it's a crime scene or not, whether the U.S. attorney thinks it's a crime scene or not. And he fought and put his whole professional reputation on it. And they backed off and they said, okay, yeah. And so Richard Marks kept his team at Staten Island for the long haul, was there right through the end. They had the closing ceremony. He was on stage with D.I. Luongo, with the mayor, and I think the governor was even there and stuff. And Richard's on that stage with them. And he did a phenomenal job. And his team, the way he built, he had to bring in people from all over the country every 2 to 4 weeks. They were rotating people in. But you'll hear from Richard, you'll hear his stories about the things that they found in some of those cars and how they got it back to the families. And the families would come and want to see Staten Island. They would want to see, there was a whole, just a whole section of all the crushed cars and then all different things that they would kind of separate. And the families would come. They had time set aside for the families to come and visit and things like that. And so, you'll hear these stories and I think they're just amazing, from Shanksville, from the Pentagon, from Fresh Kills, from Ground Zero, from the morgue. Jerry Cucuzzo, who's a friend of mine, he was in charge of the FBI operation at the morgue. He's very good friends now with the investigator of the medical examiner office, who he worked months with on that. And they would stand on either side of the table and unzip the bags that were coming up from Ground Zero with human remains and try to do identifications and stuff. And Jerry tells the story of how they did that. Again, there were mass casualty incidents before, but never on this stage, right? Never on this scale.
Well, Bobby, Barbara Butcher, who was the chief of staff for the OCME, she was like the head medical legal investigator. She had said that because of 9/11, DNA technology grew like 2 or 3 generations. Better. It got better at identifying things. And of course, now with investigative genetic genealogy, they're taking all the credit. But I think 9/11 had a lot to do with them reaching where they are in investigative genetic genealogy.
I think you're right. I think because when you have something like that, these are incidents that don't happen often. They're generational, once in a generation, maybe sometimes once in a lifetime. And what happens when they do happen is people say, this is so important. We're pushing all the bureaucratic rules aside. We need to do this. We need something that gets us to here. And everybody goes, okay, the rules are out the window. The bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through, we're going to push all that aside and just get to the mission and get to the, so they push things down that normally would take so much longer because you have this horrific once in a lifetime event and people put all of that other crap aside that usually holds up innovation. It holds up creativity because all of these bureaucratic rules and stuff that's in place. And so I think you're right. I think at 9/11, all of that went out the window. If somebody said, I need a piece of machinery that does this, there were no rules. We're going to make that machine. We're going to throw everything else out.
Right.
And we don't care about the rules. We don't care about the laws. You need this, we're going to make it. And that was the attitude. So innovation in those periods of time really gets pushed out. And then, like we said, then time passes and those bureaucratic rules come back in. Things aren't as extreme. And so they come back in. But there's small windows of time after these kinds of events, certainly after 9/11. It was probably even wider open and for a longer period of time, that innovation can flourish because people are willing to step out of the way with their arcane rules and bureaucratic regulations. And if somebody says,
it's like the emergency exception to a search warrant. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're going to make me jump through all these hoops when I'm chasing a guy through a grocery store, Yeah.
Right.
And then that's what it is. It's that exception. I think you're right. I think that, I know Jerry talks about the morgue. Remember that kind of mini city again that they built on, with all those refrigerated trucks and stuff. Again, we've had mass casualty incidents, but never. And Jerry actually was in Kosovo for those big body digs, so he was used to being around. He was a part of DMORT, the disaster mortuary team, and I mean he knew mass casualty events, but never. You'll hear him directly from him how they did that operation. With such a scale. And I mean, in a way, it's a good thing that happened in New York because there's no city like New York to handle big things. Yeah.
That's true.
Go visit the UNGA every year, the UN General Assembly. I mean, New York handles big things that, and so I think there's not a better group of people, whether it be the PD, the fire, medical examiner, anybody there's, I'll get in trouble with some FBI agents. I say this, but like the New York office of the FBI is considered the flagship, and Washington field office they kind of protest when I say that, but they always say, like, if you've done a year in the FBI office in New York, it's like doing 5 years in an FBI office anywhere else because of the things you're exposed to and the cases you work and the people you work with and stuff. And so New York was, answered the call. And I'm in a way, I'm glad it happened in New York because New York handled it in a way that I don't know that a lot of other cities could have. You probably would have had a lot of people from New York going to Chicago if it happened in Chicago, going to Miami if it happened in Miami, type of thing. But yeah, I don't mean to say I'm glad it happened. I'm saying that New Yorkers handled it in a way that probably, I don't know if anybody else could have. And when you see stuff like that village that they set up at Fresh Kills, or that operation at the morgue, with those refrigerated trucks and things.
Bobby, what killed me too was, I don't know if you had spent any time there. I didn't spend a lot of time. I was there a couple of times, was the bereavement center, which was like horrible. It was right shortly after 9/11. People were reporting their family missing and they were in the towers. So they would come there and detectives would interview them and to determine whether or not they actually did have a family member and where we were, if they were recovered in the identification process. So you can imagine there was nearly 3,000 people, I think, killed in the towers, right? I don't think it quite hit 3,000, but
29 something. Yeah.
And some of them were bone fragments.
Right.
Some of them were skin. Some of them were just pieces of of DNA.
Some of them were never found. I mean, Lenny Hatton, our agent, we never found any DNA or anything of his. He was gone. He was completely, incinerated. And I think that I got a VIP tour last week of the museum memorial, and they say they're still finding DNA. There's a whole operation behind a wall at the museum that's off limits to everybody, and it's the medical examiner kind of controls it, and they're still doing DNA testing because, as you said, every couple of years there's this new technology that can glean, like the MVAC in 2016 or 2015 when the MVAC was invented. Right now it can get DNA off of stuff, but previously we would just push aside and say you can't get DNA off of that. But now there's a machine that makes it possible. So that there's still operation going on to identify people and DNA. Like they have the names of the people that died, but they haven't matched DNA to all of them. And I think March of this year there was another identification through DNA of a victim of 9/11, and so I think that's important for the families.
In fact, Dr. Charles Hirsch, who was the chief medical examiner then, I attended a lecture of his after 9/11, and he said that the reason we haven't found, and we may never found, is because many of the people were basically turned into a gas. They were vaporized.
Right.
He goes, and they'll never be. And he took a lot of heat for saying that because, of course, the families don't want to hear that. But he was trying to tell the truth, and he had given lectures all over the world. In fact, he was talking about some lecture he gave. I forgot what country, where there was a couple of thousand people there, and he got a standing ovation at the end of it.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. His team. I mean, look, that's the thing. There were, like you said earlier, there were so many heroes in this thing. And not just the ones that were there that day, but the people that spent months and now years working for the victims and doing that. And you'll hear in my series, you'll hear from Catherine. Her name was right there, just Catherine Turman. She was our victim witness person at the FBI, her whole team was all about dealing with the victims. She had done Lockerbie, she had done Pan Am 103 for the victims and stuff, and so she was a veteran of these type of events and dealing with. And she says for years after, they would get, she tells a story. I'll give you this quick story of one, and you'll hear this in After the Fall. She gets a call from our contractor in Texas who was recipient of a lot of the things that we didn't have anything to do with anymore, but they were basically a climate controlled storage facility, and they process things for law enforcement. And they have this huge facilities in Texas. And so she gets a call in her Washington, D.C. office from her contact down there and says, look, we found something. It's a letter written to a husband from a wife. We've rehabilitated it. They have ways of kind of rehabilitating material and stuff and gleaning what stuff. Well, this thing was a small slip of paper, folded up tightly, put in a credit card slot in a wallet. The wallet was folded tightly, put into a purse. The purse was tight and put into a seat back pocket. Well, they found it and they took it out, and it was, of course, it was partially charred, and then it was wet, and so they unfolded it carefully, and they spent many months chemically rehabilitating it, and they got it back. And he read it to her over the phone, and it was basically, go on with your life. It was a letter from a wife who knew she was about to die on one of the planes. And she said, okay, can you get that to me? And she either flew there or they flew it back up to her Washington. She had it, and she had already previously been in contact with the husband who had one child. They had one child, I believe. Again, if you want the more accurate details, listen to the show. But she says she read it to the guy over the phone, and she couldn't get through it. It took her 5 times, 5 calls to get through it because they were both crying. And then she actually flew to him and presented it to him in a preserved form. And he called her later, I don't know how long later, and said, look, it was 2 years, I think, after 9/11 that they found this. This is how long it had been going on. And he said, my son was in therapy. I was in therapy. We were having the hardest time, dealing with this. And it was like my wife from heaven sent us a message through that letter, and you delivered it to us. And we're both much, much better. We're fine now. We're on a road that we weren't on previous to getting that letter. We are doing so much better. And he was thankful, and he called her and told her that she hung up and started crying again, and it's like, that's a sign. That little thing never would have been found. It was this little piece of paper, and somebody worked at that. Somebody sitting in Texas in a warehouse 2 years after 9/11 took the care to unfold this thing and then subject it to the processes that they needed to do to kind of get those words back on that paper. And it meant the world to somebody. It meant the world to that person and their son. And they looked at it as mom reaching out from heaven. She probably saw us not having an easy time of it, and she made that happen somehow. And her words came to us, and now we are able to go on with our lives. And those stories are littered throughout the After the Fall.
Bobby, just me hearing you talk about that story, I get a little emotional, and it's like the human element to this thing and the humanity of law enforcement, and not just law enforcement, of other people that survived 9/11, other people that worked 9/11. I mentioned earlier the iron workers and the EMS, like everyone, EMS, court officers, NYPD, Port Authority, fire department, lost all those people. And anyone I'm leaving out, I apologize. But there was definitely this human element and the sense that this city, this cold, unforgiving city, all came together. And, I remember we going up the street, NYPD, and now people are throwing shit at you, and it's like for a while, forever it was after 9/11, a month and a half, weeks, whatever it was, it felt good to be appreciated at that level, and I don't think there was ever any feeling like that ever again or since, but it definitely felt good. And it's so important that these stories get told. It's just like we spoke before we went on the air about the Holocaust and how I think Steven Spielberg made some recordings of the survivors of the Holocaust to convince people, yes, this really did happen, for the naysayers that are saying it didn't happen. And for 9/11, just look at this podcast. See, you're looking at two of them that responded there, and not just responded to it, but are acutely affected by it, that know people that died there and have some health effects, some ill health effects from our work there. But you know something? If it happened tomorrow, I'd do it again.
Absolutely. I lost 6 people in the building that I lived in. I lived in Hoboken at the time. Hoboken, New Jersey was right across the river. And I was in a four floor walk up, and I lost 6 people from my building, just my building, 6 neighbors. I didn't know, I knew one of them, but 6 neighbors. 200 people from Hoboken died. And Hoboken was only 1 square mile, right? And so, yeah, everybody knew somebody. But yeah, what touched me, like I said, I still get choked up when I remember sitting there, because my wife was working on the Olympics in Salt Lake City at the time. So I was doing those 12 hours at Ground Zero. And I did the same thing when we went up to the Javits Center to kind of sign off, grab a sandwich and go home, like a 14th Street or wherever that opening was. People couldn't come any further south. And then you'd get through that, and there was this phalanx of people wanting to give you water or give you a sandwich or just say thank you. And it never happened to me. And like my brother and I always have this little ongoing thing on competition, because, in uniform, you do get recognized sometimes. You get to go in parades, and you get to go to the ball game if it's Law Enforcement Appreciation Night. Those of us who are in law enforcement that don't have a uniform, we don't ever get the good stuff. We don't get to be in parades. We don't get to be recognized at the ball game because, because we're, the silent service kind of thing. And so that was the first time anybody would because usually, like my brother, even I would say firemen always help people, right? They get cats out of trees, and but even the cops, sometimes you can help a little old lady whose house got broken into, whatever. Whenever people interact with the FBI, it's almost always bad news for them. It's always bad news for them, right? And then I ran the dive team for 19 years, which meant I was going getting dead kids out of lakes and rivers and stuff, and making sure the families got the bodies back. And so it was never, when I had a good day, somebody else is going to have a really bad day. That was just the career, you didn't have that. But when we got to like 14th Street or 23rd Street, whatever because they kept moving it south and going up to the Javits Center and having all those people waiting for us, and they saw us in the, in our suit, covered in dust and coming up, but yeah, it was that was kind of the first time that we were allowed to really be recognized publicly, because nobody knows who we really are. And if we're wearing those FBI yellow windbreakers, it's not good news. Nobody's thanking us. There was one time, I will say that in 1990, we did a large scale where we took a whole building down, a whole block in Bed-Stuy down, and the people were cheering at us from out the windows because we liberated this drug infested neighborhood. But but that's rare. And it was really amazing that people were doing that. And like I said, I still get choked up when I was sitting there in my house by myself watching a Yankee game, zoning out, and seeing somebody hold up that sign that says, "We're all New Yorkers now." And this was Kansas City, and the white devil Yankees were in town. And yet that sign choked me up when it said, "We're all New Yorkers now." I just I still think of it like that was one of those seminal moments. The other was coming, I had a warehouse in New Jersey where I had the dive team, and I would drive, I lived in Hoboken, which is east. So I would drive eastbound home every day. And so a couple of months after, maybe 6 months, 5 months after 9/11, my boss said, go out to the warehouse, clear your desk, clear your email, take a day just to be out there and not here in the city. And so I did that. And then, so I'm driving home that night, it was sunset, and driving back towards the city to Hoboken. And I came up over the the 1 and 9 has this little rise there in Jersey. I think it was like in Secaucus. It kind of comes up, and it's the first time you're high enough to get a little view of the city. And so I came up over that rise, a drive I had done 1,000 times before. And for a moment, I remember going, holy shit, where's the towers? Like, the towers were always a fixture in that.
Yeah.
And just for a moment, I don't even know how, I can't even tell you what a fraction of a second it was, where my mind said, like, where's the towers? And though I snapped out of it, of course, but that night I couldn't sleep, and I had so much guilt that, like, how could and it's one of those things, you're on autopilot, you've done the commute 1,000 times, you don't see things without, and I had such guilt that I had forgotten, even for the slightest fraction of a moment, where the towers weren't there anymore, that I went out and I contacted a cousin of mine and who was on the fire department, and friends who were on the fire department, and they had gotten tattoos already, and there was this artist, this very famous tattoo artist that had already retired, moved to Connecticut. He was a painter now. Came out of retirement to do 9/11 tattoos, and he would only do them for our first responder community. And so I worked with him for a couple of months on the elements that I wanted. We'd send drawings back and forth on email, and then I got the tattoo I wanted. FBI, NYPD, FDNY, Port Authority Police are all represented there. Lenny Hatton and John O'Neill are represented there. The 3 sites. So I have the Pentagon, I have the Pennsylvania Flight 93, and I have, of course, the towers at Maine, and the smoke is coming out of the towers. But Lady Liberty is holding her torch coming out of the towers, because that's not going to be defeated. And so it was really an emotional thing, and so I got that just because I never want to forget again. And so every morning when I look in the mirror, it's there. Every night it's there. It's a visual reminder, because I had that one little tiny experience that I said, where's the towers? Like, not to myself, in the car by myself, but it was such a feeling of guilt, like, oh my God, are we going to forget? Are we, and look, life has to return to normal at some point, and it does, and we go on, we do move on. But I think the 9/11, like I said, last week, I got through about 3/4 of the 9/11 museum before I got a little too emotional, and my wife took me out, and, but I'll get through it the next time. But it's 20 years that I hadn't been back to Lower Manhattan, and we had this ceremony at 1PP, One Police Plaza, police headquarters, and the FBI has awarded all of us that are in the medical screening program that are potentially dealing with illnesses from 9/11. Got this pin. They designed this pin, and the FBI director came up from Washington, and I got to see a bunch of old colleagues, some of who are sick, some of whom are not sick yet. And it was really a great journey. I got to see the city again. I took my wife to the main branch in the New York Public Library and Bryant Park, and which, boy, you couldn't used to go through. Now Bryant Park's beautiful. I remember Bryant.
Yeah, it was.
Junkies.
They were selling loose joints and all kinds of stuff in Bryant Park.
Beautiful. I couldn't believe it. My wife's like, "Oh, there's a park behind." I go, "We're not going in that park." And then we kind of walked around the block. I'm looking, I'm like, "Oh my God, this place is beautiful. This is not the way
pretty nice."
Park.
Bobby, we're at an hour and 14 minutes. This was fantastic. I mean, I think we could talk forever. If you want to come back and do another episode on this, you're always welcome.
Sure, thanks.
I want to remind everyone that this is After the Fall. The FBI, it's an Audible show, the FBI response to 9/11, and Bobby Chacon's told us some great stories from the fall, from the Audible, and you can get this on Amazon, right, Bobby?
Yeah, Amazon now owns Audible. So yeah, if you have Amazon, you probably have a subscription to Audible. If not, I think there's a 30-day free trial. You can go on and listen to it. And if you're like, I love Audible, I'm in the car so much. I listen to a lot of the Audible projects like this. We did another one called Brooklyn North about a case in Brooklyn North. And there's an Audible project there, but the Audible projects are great. They're very easy to listen to at the gym or in the car and stuff. And like I said, you hear directly from the actual people that did the work and were there on the ground. And there weren't enough, there's millions of people probably and millions of stories, but we have to slim it down for time. And I think we picked some good ones, some entertaining ones, and I think some eye-opening ones, both on the investigation side and the human side, that tell great stories.
That's fantastic. Bobby Chacon, thank you so much for coming on, folks. This is the Police Off the Cuff, the Law and Crime series. And of course, the Audible, Get After the Fall, go on Amazon, listen to it. Bobby Chacon is a retired FBI agent, 27 years, lawyer. Now he's a writer. The guy's he's living large now. He's living the life, but he paid his dues to get there. Folks, have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Bobby.
Thanks, George.
One episode just ain't enough.